It was supposed to be just another quiet evening, one of those simple nights where everything feels right. Dinner was being served, the wine was flowing, and the conversation was light, filled with casual jokes and the usual chatter that comes with hosting a few friends. My life, or at least the way I saw it, was settled in this little routine. I was proud of my family, the way things had turned out. After all, I've been married to Megan for over a decade, and we had 2 kids, Ryan, who's 12, and Emma, 9. We had the house, the cars, and everything that should make a man proud. There was nothing major to complain about. At least, that's what I thought. Tonight, we had Tom over for dinner, our neighbor. Tom and I had been friends for years, and we often shared a drink and some laughs. He was a good guy, easygoing, and always ready to pitch in when I needed help around the house. Sarah and I had invited him over for dinner before, and things always went well. But tonight, something was different. Megan wasn't quite herself. I noticed it almost immediately. She wasn't as engaged as usual, no casual jokes, no warm banter. Instead, she kept glancing down at her phone, her fingers tapping away like she was waiting for a message or avoiding some conversation. I tried to ignore it, but it gnawed at me. Maybe she was just tired. We continued on with the dinner, chatting about the kids, work, life in general, the usual stuff. But as I looked over at Megan, she seemed distracted, distant. And then, there was the way Tom was looking at her, like he was trying too hard to engage her. He was smiling a little too brightly, making sure to touch her arm in that casual, friendly way, but it felt forced, almost rehearsed. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I had a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, something I couldn't ignore. Why did it seem like there was a tension building between them? Why was Tom so intent on drawing Megan into the conversation? After dinner, I helped Megan clear the dishes while Tom went to the living room. The moment she turned to walk into the kitchen, I caught sight of her phone on the coffee table. Without even thinking, I picked it up, my curiosity burning, though I didn't know what I expected to find. As soon as I unlocked it, I saw a text message that made my heart stop. "Are you sure he's out with the kids tonight?" It was from Tom. I froze. My mind raced as I read the next line. "Yes, he's gone. We're in the clear." My blood ran cold. I had seen enough. My entire body went rigid with the weight of what I was reading. This wasn't a random conversation. This was personal. The kind of personal that makes a man question everything about his life, everything he thought he knew about his marriage. I set the phone back on the table, my hands trembling. My first instinct was to confront Megan right then and there, to ask her what was going on, but I couldn't. My thoughts were too jumbled, my emotions too raw. Instead, I stepped outside. I didn't even tell her where I was going. I just grabbed my jacket, slipped into my shoes, and left the house. I didn't care about anything at that moment, nothing except getting away. I got in my car, and I drove. I had to clear my head. My whole life felt like it had been flipped upside down in a matter of seconds. The road blurred in front of me, the streetlights passing by like markers of some life I no longer recognized. Where was I going? I had no idea. I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was that I couldn't be there, not with Megan and not with Tom. I couldn't bear the thought of facing either of them. I had to run. To escape, to think, to process. Everything had changed in a heartbeat, and I wasn't sure I could ever look at my wife the same way again. I wasn't even sure what to do with all this anger and confusion welling up inside of me. That was when I realized something. The life I thought I was living was a lie, and I had no idea where to go from here. I don't even remember how long I was driving. The road was a blur, the world outside the car window passing by like some kind of detached dream I couldn't quite wake up from. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel, and I felt like I was suffocating in my own thoughts. The realization of what Megan had done was too much to process all at once. How had I missed it? How had I missed them? It was as if everything I'd trusted, everything I thought was solid, had crumbled in an instant. My mind kept racing, going over every moment, every detail, searching for the signs I had ignored, the moments that, in hindsight, made everything so painfully obvious. At some point, I ended up at a gas station, though I had no real intention of stopping. I got out of the car and stood there, staring at the pumps, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of it. I didn't want to go back to the house, not yet. I didn't want to face Megan, or Tom, or the mess I now found myself in. What was I supposed to do? Confront her? No, not yet. I wasn't ready to face her, to hear the excuses, to hear her try to explain away the fact that she had been lying to me for God knows how long. The betrayal felt like a weight on my chest, suffocating me. As I stood there, staring at the empty road. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to look at it, but I couldn't resist. It was a message from Megan, asking where I was and why I hadn't come back. My gut twisted. I hadn't even thought about what I was going to say to her when I returned, but now, with her message in front of me, I was forced to confront the reality of it all. How was I supposed to act? What was I supposed to say? I didn't respond. I couldn't. I wasn't ready. So I climbed back into the car and started driving again, heading nowhere in particular. I just needed to get away, to clear my head. I felt like I was losing control, like I was trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. My thoughts kept circling back to the message from Tom, those few simple words that had shattered my world. How long had this been going on? How long had Megan been hiding this from me? Hours passed, and I ended up on the outskirts of the city, in an area I didn't recognize. It was quiet here, and for the first time in what felt like days, I let myself breathe. I pulled into a small diner, hoping for a moment of clarity. I stepped inside, ordered a coffee, and sat down at the counter. The world outside seemed so distant, so far removed from what I had just discovered. I tried to focus on the warmth of the coffee in my hands, the steady hum of conversation around me, but all I could think about was Megan. I didn't know what to do with the rage inside me. It was like a slow burn, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts, consuming me. I wanted to scream, to shout, to throw something. But there was a cold, bitter reality I had to face first. The woman I loved, the woman I had built my life with, had betrayed me. I couldn't escape that fact. No matter how hard I tried to push it out of my mind, it kept coming back, hitting me in waves. I sat there for what felt like hours, watching the clock tick by, listening to the quiet buzz of the diner's lights. I knew I had to go back eventually, but the thought of facing Megan, of having that conversation, made my stomach turn. What was I supposed to say to her? How could I ever look at her the same way again? How could I ever trust her again? I didn't have the answers. I didn't know how to move forward. But one thing was clear, I couldn't go back to that life. Not without confronting the truth. Not without understanding how deep this betrayal really went. When I finally left the diner, the weight of it all still hung heavy on my chest. I was determined to go home, to face Megan, to get the answers I needed. But as I drove back, I realized something. I didn't know if I was ready to hear them. The drive back home was the hardest part. The world around me felt distant, like I was living in a haze, detached from everything I knew. I kept imagining the conversation that was waiting for me. What would I say to Megan? What could I say? The words seemed too small, too insignificant compared to what I had just discovered. It wasn't just the affair itself. It was the betrayal, the sheer weight of the lies that had been woven around us. I couldn't even wrap my head around it. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I approached the house, the place that had once been my sanctuary, now a reminder of everything that had come crashing down. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't see Megan's car, but I knew she was home. The lights inside were on, and the stillness of the evening seemed louder than usual. As I stepped out of the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into some kind of trap. My heart was pounding in my chest, my thoughts racing. The door to the house opened just as I reached it, and there she was, standing in the doorway. She looked surprised to see me. Her eyes went wide for a second before she quickly masked it with a smile. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice a little too casual. But I could hear the slight tremor in it. She was nervous. And for a moment, I thought about letting it go, pretending like everything was fine. I could have smiled back, told her I just needed some time alone, maybe even made up some excuse. But I couldn't. Not after what I had seen, not after everything I had learned. I couldn't keep pretending. "I know," I said, my voice low and steady, though it was taking all my strength not to raise it. "I know what's been going on, Megan. I know about you and Tom." Her face went pale, and she froze, her eyes flickering toward the living room. The panic in her expression was unmistakable. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but the words never came. Instead, she just stood there, looking at me as if the ground beneath her had suddenly given way. I couldn't hold back anymore. "How long, Megan?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but it felt like it echoed through the entire house. "How long has this been happening?" She took a step back, pressing herself against the doorframe like she was trying to create some distance between us, but there was no escape now. The truth was out, and we both knew it. I never meant for this to happen," she stammered, her voice shaking. It just happened, Oliver." She reached out, as if to touch my arm, but I pulled back. I couldn't let her get close. I couldn't even look at her without feeling the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. "Just happened," I repeated, my voice gaining strength. "Megan, You don't just fall into an affair. You don't just accidentally sleep with someone, especially someone I consider a friend. You chose this. You chose him. You chose to lie to me, to hide it from me. For how long? I don't know, she said, her eyes welling up with tears. I never meant to hurt you. I was so lonely, Oliver. You were always gone, always so distant. And Tom, he was there. He made me feel seen again. I was just trying to feel something. I stared at her, the words she was saying sinking in slowly. She was blaming me, wasn't she? She was turning this around like I was the one who had driven her to this. I had worked hard, yes. I had been busy with work, with our lives, but I had always been there when it mattered. Or so I thought. You were lonely? I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Is that what this is about? You didn't think about how I would feel? How our family would feel? You didn't think about the damage this would do? I took a step forward, the anger building up inside of me. You want to talk about loneliness? I've been alone, too. Alone in this house, alone in this marriage, but I didn't go to him to fix it. I stayed and worked through it. Megan looked down, tears streaming down her face now. I'm sorry, Oliver. I never meant for any of this to happen. The words, I'm sorry, weren't enough anymore. They were just words, hollow words. I had heard them too many times before, especially in the years when we had started to drift apart. They had become meaningless. She wasn't sorry, she was just sorry she'd gotten caught. Sorry, I repeated, feeling the weight of it all hit me at once. Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't bring back what we had. It doesn't erase what you did. My chest tightened as I spoke, and I took a step back, trying to distance myself from the storm of emotions threatening to consume me. I looked around the house, our home. It felt so different now. So cold. So foreign. Everything that had once seemed so perfect, so well-ordered, was now just a backdrop for a lie. I didn't belong here anymore. Not with her. Not with him. I'm leaving, I said, the words hanging in the air between us like a heavy fog. She opened her mouth to protest, but I raised my hand, cutting her off. No. You've made your choice, Megan. And now I'm making mine. I turned and walked toward the door, not looking back. I didn't want to see the look on her face, the desperation in her eyes. I couldn't. The pain was too much, the betrayal too deep. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, and I felt a sense of finality that I hadn't felt in years. This was it. There was no going back. I had lost her. And, more importantly, I had lost myself in the process. The decision to leave wasn't easy, but it was the only thing I could do. I wasn't just leaving Megan and the house. I was leaving the version of my life I had spent years building. In that moment, everything felt like it was slipping away from me, my family, my home, the future I had worked so hard to create. The house I had come to call home felt more like a cage than a sanctuary now. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there another second. I had to get away from it all, from the lies and the betrayal that had torn my world apart. I didn't pack much. There was no point in trying to hold on to anything when everything was already gone. I grabbed a duffel bag and threw in a few clothes, enough to get me through the next few days. I didn't know where I was headed, but that was the last thing on my mind. My thoughts were consumed by what had just happened. Megan's words echoed in my head, each one laced with guilt and regret, but there was nothing she could say now that would make this right. I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going back. Not to that life. Not to her. I drove for hours, not really caring where the road took me. The city, the suburbs, everything I knew faded into the background as I put miles between myself and the place that had once been my home. The wind from the open windows ruffled my hair, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was a start. The further I drove, the more the weight of it all seemed to lift, even if just a little. There was no clear destination, no final goal in sight. I just needed time. Time to think. Time to figure out what came next. By the time I reached the small town on the outskirts of the city, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I checked into a dingy motel, the kind of place where the bedspread had seen better days and the air smelled faintly of mildew. But it didn't matter. I wasn't there for comfort. I just needed a place to rest, somewhere I could gather my thoughts. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next, but I couldn't go back. Not to Megan. Not to the lies. The weight of everything was still pressing down on me, but at least here, in this rundown room, I was alone. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to sleep. But even in my sleep, the dreams were filled with flashes of Megan, her face, her tears, her apology. But nothing she could say would change what had happened. I wasn't the man I used to be. The man who had been content, who had trusted his wife with everything. That man was gone. I didn't know what was left of me, but I knew one thing. I couldn't go back to that life. Not now. Not after what she had done. The next morning, I woke up with a clearer mind, though still foggy from the lack of real rest. I needed to think about what came next. I couldn't stay in that motel forever, but I wasn't ready to go back to my old life, either. I had no idea where to begin, but I knew I couldn't let Megan's betrayal define me. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I decided to head further into the countryside. Maybe it was the quiet, or maybe it was just the need to be far away from everything that reminded me of what I had lost. But I didn't want to be in the city anymore. I wanted space, time, to think. It was like a heavy fog had settled in my mind, and I needed to walk through it to get to the other side. I needed to find a place where I could breathe, where I could start over, even if it meant doing it alone. As I drove through the winding roads, the scenery started to change. The busy streets and bright lights of the city faded, replaced by quiet farmlands and empty fields. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but there was something about the isolation that seemed to fit my mood. The open roads seemed to speak to me, offering a chance to leave the past behind and take the first steps into an uncertain future. I had no plan, no destination. But maybe, just maybe, that was okay. Maybe for the first time, I didn't need to know what came next. I found a small town, tucked away in the hills, where the people were friendly but distant, and the pace of life was slow enough that you could actually hear yourself think. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, where you could just blend into the background if you wanted. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I rented a small cabin on the edge of town, a place with creaky floors and a front porch that overlooked the forest. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet, and it was far from everything I had left behind. The peace I found there was exactly what I needed. No distractions, no reminders of Megan or the life I had once known. It was a place where I could just be. Over the next few days, I began to clear my mind. I went for long walks through the woods, sat by the small stream that ran behind the cabin, and allowed myself to feel the weight of everything that had happened without rushing to make sense of it. The pain was still there, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts, but it was different now. I wasn't consumed by it. I wasn't drowning in the anger and confusion anymore. I was slowly learning to let go. I didn't have the answers, and I wasn't sure when I would find them. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was starting to heal. The road ahead was still unclear, but at least I was on my way. And that was enough for now. It had been a few weeks since I left, and though the weight of everything that had happened still lingered, I had begun to adjust to my new reality. Life in the small town had its own rhythm, a slow, almost deliberate pace that felt far removed from the rush of the city, the chaos of my old life. I had settled into the cabin, finding peace in the solitude, even if it felt a little lonely at times. But loneliness was a welcome companion now, compared to the suffocating cloud of betrayal that had once hung over me. The quiet here, the silence between the trees, felt like a balm for my soul. It wasn't that I was running away from my past, though it seemed that way at first. It was more about allowing myself the space to rebuild, to become someone new without the constant reminders of who I had been. I spent most of my days reading, walking the trails around the cabin, and even doing small odd jobs to keep myself busy. The work wasn't important. It was just something to occupy my hands and my mind. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch, the cool air settling around me as the sun dipped below the horizon. There was something calming about those moments, the way the stars began to come out, the way the world slowed down. It was a stark contrast to the hustle I had known, and for once, I felt like I could breathe again. The anger that had once been so overwhelming started to fade. It wasn't gone entirely, but it wasn't driving me anymore. I didn't have to constantly think about Megan, about the lies. I didn't need to rehash everything over and over in my mind. The distance had allowed me to see things more clearly, to understand that I couldn't control what happened. I could only control how I responded to it. And the response I had chosen was to let go of the bitterness and start rebuilding. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the memories of Megan, the hurt, the betrayal creeping back into my thoughts. But with time, I learned to push them aside. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. I wasn't going to be the man who stayed stuck in the past, who couldn't move on. I deserved more than that. One afternoon, As I was making my way into town to grab a few supplies, I ran into someone new, someone who, despite my best efforts to keep to myself, made me realize that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for me. Her name was Emma, and she was the local bookstore owner. She had been running the shop for years, a small, cozy space tucked away on the main street. I'd passed it several times before, but hadn't really thought about stopping in. But that day, something about the way she smiled at me when I walked in made me feel like I could take a step forward. She wasn't interested in my past, my baggage. She was just kind, welcoming, and eager to talk about books, which, I found, was a perfect distraction. We talked about our favorite authors, about the kind of stories we enjoyed. The conversation was light, but there was something refreshing about it. I realized, as I sat there in that little bookstore, that I hadn't had a genuine conversation with someone in months. It wasn't that I had been avoiding people, but I had been too focused on my own pain to really connect with anyone. Emma was different. She didn't ask me about my life or my past, and I didn't offer it. We were simply two people sharing an afternoon over coffee and books. It was simple, but it felt good. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of something beyond the numbness that had taken over my life after everything had fallen apart. I didn't see her every day, but over the next few weeks, we became friends. She was patient with me, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. And slowly, I found myself opening up to her, not about Megan or the affair, but about the person I was becoming, the man I was trying to be. Emma never judged, never made me feel like I had to explain myself. She was just there, and in her presence, I began to feel the weight of my past loosen its grip on me. It wasn't a love story, not yet, at least, but it was the beginning of something new. Something that reminded me that I wasn't broken, that I could still build a life, a future, even after everything had been torn down. And that was enough for me. I wasn't ready to jump into a new relationship, but I was ready to believe in the possibility of a future again. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself waking up each morning with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't chasing anything or anyone. I was just living. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally moving forward. There would be more challenges, more moments where I'd be forced to confront my past. But for now, I was content. The road ahead wasn't clear, and maybe it never would be, but I had learned that it didn't need to be. I didn't need to have all the answers anymore. What mattered was that I was on my own path now, making my way towards something better, something that wasn't defined by betrayal or loss. And that was a future worth walking toward.